Let's make watercolor pumpkins! It's autumn, my favorite time of the year when it comes to finding inspiration to paint, because nature is so beautiful in this time of the year with its changing colors and the harvest period and basically the coziness of the season. I love it. So I'd like you to join me in this painting session, so grab your painting supplies. And you'll find the materials that you need listed in the description of this video. Of course, you're going to need watercolor paint, paper, brushes, a pencil, eraser, some paper towels, 2 jars with clean water, and you're good to go. Grab your pencil because we're starting with the sketch of the pumpkin. So you start with a flat circle or an oval, and then we're going to be drawing the curves of the pumpkin inside of it. You start with a bigger shape in the middle of the pumpkin and then make them smaller going outwards. So once you've drawn these, you can draw the stem of the pumpkin inside with some curvy lines. And then you can add some other curves at the base of the pumpkin to complete the shape. Of course, for some finishing touches, we can add some leaves and vines attached to the pumpkin. If you want to, you can of course practice the sketching first before you're going to paint your final composition on the watercolor paper. For the sketching, I suggest that you use some cheaper paper. Usually I draw thinner lines, and I suggest that you do the same because then you won't be able to see, or it's more difficult to see the pencil lines when your composition is finished after painting. You just want to see the lines good enough so that you know where to paint. But for now, for this video, I'm drawing thicker lines so that you'll be able to see what I'm doing. And of course, I also do this every time, even when I draw thinner lines. I use my kneading eraser and I'm lifting off all the excess pencil. So as I said, you only see a little bit the place where you need to go when painting. But once your painting is finished, you won't be able to see, or it's more difficult to see the pencil lines through the watercolor. It doesn't matter if there are a few places where you see the pencil lines, but I think it's more beautiful if it's erased anywhere possible. Of course, we're creating art, we are painting, and it's the little flaws that make art beautiful. This is just a way that I like to create my illustrations. And when there are lines on places I don't want to have any line at all, I use a soft eraser to entirely erase the pencil. So it's time to start painting. When I start painting a pumpkin, I usually start with orange. I know that there are pumpkins in other colors, but orange is my favorite. It's also a very nice autumn color. We are going to drop in some other colors while the paint's still wet, because then it blends in very nicely and you get some extra shading and it gives the illustration some depth. So basically what we're trying to do here is paint within the lines. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you paint this way, then the paint doesn't have to dry before you move on to the next piece. Now, at this time, we are only painting with orange, but if you are painting with different colors in different shapes close to each other, then you want to avoid the colors blending into each other. Of course, again, it doesn't matter if it happens, just not too often. You know, a few flaws makes a piece of art beautiful. You just something you want to look at and try to avoid. So as I said, we're using, in this case, a darker orange color, and I don't paint over every part. I want to keep it playful and think about where the shades would be. You can see where the paint is still wet on my layer because there the color is flowing, but there are also parts where it doesn't flow, so I'm using some water on my brush to move it around a bit. So now I'm dropping in some yellow and some burnt umber, some dark brown, especially at the bottom because it's a good shade color. Of course, feel free to pick any color that you like. You can follow along exactly as what I am doing, or you can make it your own painting. So now I like to drop in some darker color, a bit red, or you can even use dark purple, dark pink. It's just how vibrant do you like your painting to be, and how brave you are. I mean, some people like softer paintings. I like them very colorful and bright. So adding some more orange because I really like the pumpkin orange. Okay, you don't have to do this if you don't like to. And now, this is what I explained before, we are going to paint the green stem. Also, my apologies, after filming this I noticed that the lighting isn't perfect, so you won't be able to see this green part very well because of the shimmering of the light. But what I did, I used some sap green to paint in the stem of the pumpkin, and then I'm using some dark brown, burnt umber, to add some shading. What you can also see from this angle that I'm painting really wet. Now I suggest that you don't paint this wet. I shouldn't myself, really. I am used to paint on other paper, thicker paper, on which it's okay to paint wet. And this paper doesn't really absorb the water as I'm used to, so in this case I use too much water. So something you can look out for. So basically I am painting this sketch in like it's an coloring book sheet, and I'm using paint for it. So for the leaves I'm using sap green and then a darker blue. The darker blue I use for deep shading. I also like to drop in some yellow. I like to mix it around a bit so that every leaf looks different. I mean, in nature they also look different, so I also suggest that you play around a bit. Sap green is my go-to. I always start out my green leaves with sap green because I just love the color, but perhaps you've got your own favorite color, then I recommend you use just what you like. Again, dropping in some darker green or blue for some shading. And as the paint is still wet, you can see it blending in very nice in the rest of the paint. You can also blend it a bit with your brush, but if you let the watercolors do their job, then it's going to look really amazing. So green for the vine. And in the meanwhile, if you look at the background, you see that some of the orange is blending in with the green. So there I wasn't careful enough, and I have two sides touch each other so that the colors started blending. And personally, I don't mind. It's not too much, and it makes this piece of art unique. And as I can repeat this very often, it's the little flaws that make art really beautiful. Don't go for perfection. if you're someone who likes to paint everything perfect and feels bad when that doesn't work out, please don't do that, because especially when you're painting natural items, in nature nothing is perfect. Everything, if you just look outside out your window right now and look at the leaves of the tree outside, none of the leaves are totally the same. So this is my favorite part. We are going to add the details. So I'm using a smaller round brush for this, a size 0 or 1, and I also paint with the tip of the brush. Make sure that you have enough pigment and water, but not too much, on your brush. The balance needs to be perfect. And for this I am just painting thin lines on the leaves. I always think this is a very mindful and relaxing exercise, and at the same time it gives a really finishing touch, some extra body to your painting. It's like at this point you can see it coming to life. So at the points where you accidentally blended in colors together, it doesn't matter because the details give it extra body, so there's no confusion. It's just adding some extra oomph. So once we painted the details on the leaves, we are also going to add some shades on the vines, and of course my hand is blocking the view, but trust me, I am painting really thin lines on the vines just for some extra shading. You see, I pick one side. I try to look at what is the most logical place for shade. I also like to stand out the where the vine is curling over itself. And then of course we can add some details to the stem of the pumpkin. For this I like to draw thin lines with some brown. And I'm just following the curve. Yeah. So I guess we're almost done with this painting. And then it's time to let it dry and move on to the other pumpkin that we're going to paint. Of course, don't forget to draw your signature on the bottom of your painting or your art piece once you finish it. So now we are going to do something really fun. We are going to paint a pumpkin. Perhaps it's almost the same pumpkin as we painted before, only this time we're not going to make a sketch first. That's possible. You can start painting without sketching first. So when it comes to the pumpkin, what I'm starting with is those curvy shapes that make a pumpkin. I'm starting with those, the center shapes. And then from there on out, I am moving outwards and making the curves smaller. So it's like half curved, even moon shaped. I'm doing this with a round brush, a size 6, and of course my favorite orange paint. Making gentle strokes and trying to make sure that you've got some white space between the curves. And I can imagine that you prefer to sketch before you start painting, so you know where you want to paint. Only I suggest that you try this out as well, and if you like to, you can practice this as often as you want. So as we did before, we are dropping in some colors to have some shading to make the colors more interesting and more vibrant. Some brown for shades at the bottom of the pumpkin. And now very gently with sap green we are going to paint the stem of the pumpkin. And really try not to touch the orange because the paint is still wet. So if you're less living life on the edge kind of person, then of course you can let the paint dry before you move on to the next part, but it isn't necessary. So at this point I also like to add in some smaller shapes at the top of the pumpkin. Add some more orange to the pumpkin. So you see, we are going really fast with painting this one. Adding some darker green into the stem. And now it's time to paint the leaves. So I'm not saying that you can never make sketches. I love sketching. But there are moments that you prefer to only paint and see how much time we are saving with skipping the sketch. And you don't have any pencil lines on your artwork at this moment. I also love this way of creating art because it gives you another way to explore your creativity. You're more flexible at this point with the paint. You usually are with the sketching, but of course, I don't know about you, but when I'm drawing with my pencil, I always feel the power of my eraser and know that I can erase the lines if I'm not completely satisfied. And of course, there are some tricks to get rid of some unwanted watercolor if you made an error, but that's not 100% effective and it only works if you're fast enough, and it depends on a few things. I think I'm going to make a separate video on how to fix mistakes with watercolor. So my point is that it feels more challenging to paint without sketching first. But as you can see, and I hope it's working out for you as well, it is totally possible. So we painted the leaves, now we're adding some vines, and I must say that I'm really happy with the end result. So of course we still need to add some details, and then this piece needs to dry. But when this is finished, I would really love to put it next to the other pumpkin that we've painting earlier and see what is the difference. If there's anything we can see that perhaps in the output we would say we prefer one method over the other. So with a small round brush, a size 0 or size 1, I'm painting in the lines of the leaves. I use a very, very dark green. And then some details on the vines. And last but not least, we are painting the details on the stem of the pumpkin. So I'm using burnt umber, dark brown, and painting thin lines again. And we're finished! So let's see how it looks compared to the other pumpkin. So of course, I painted the leaves a little bit different, but when you look at the style, I think they both look awesome. So how did it go? Did you paint both pumpkins with me? And how did the part without the sketching go? I really would love to know, are you satisfied with your creation? Please share it with me. I love to see what you've done. And if you like to receive feedback on what you've painted, don't hesitate to ask. I love to give it to you. You can share your creation on social media and use hashtag #CreateWithSandras. And of course, you can tag me. I love to see what you're doing. And if you like to leave a comment, I'd love to hear what you thought about this video, about the exercise, and if you've got any suggestions or feedback. Of course, I love to know what kind of content you like me to create. If there's a specific topic in mind, or something that you would love to paint but you think you could use some help with it, I might be able to create a tutorial or an inspirational video. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you like to see more of my content, of course don't forget to subscribe, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. So thank you again and see you in the next one.